So you will actually get to see this in the next few slides as well, all through, in fact, all through the knowledge areas and what we're going to do in the next few weeks. We will try and give you this kind of simple ways of how you can relate to and how you can actually understand this whole thing. So there's the inputs, there's a tasks and process or something that happens within that particular knowledge area, and then there's an outputs basically that would contribute to the next
Yeah.
level of activity. So this is how we would try and define, and this is going to be the key framework: inputs, tasks, and outputs. So for this particular knowledge area, the business analysis, planning, and monitoring, the inputs are basically the needs. So the needs of the stakeholders. Sometimes they're again, we discussed this. They're expressed explicitly, like I want to have a customer relationship management system. I want to manage the customers better. Sometimes they say that, you know what, we need an application where we can just store the information. What kind of application should it be within us? Should it be within this our should be hosted within our environment? Should be hosted outside? Should we buy or build? Should it be in the form of a mobile app, or it should be a web application? Is it in the form of an application, or should it just be built as a feature in already existing product? No clue. So sometimes it could be that situation as well. So some needs are expressed explicitly, whereas sometimes they're just implicit. So again, we need to deploy some of the techniques, BA techniques, and we need to come up with some kind of indication for these. We'll talk about how we can elicit those in the next few slides. And then internal objectives and external objects, sometimes they're all different. Sometimes it's the internal object, sometimes it could be the team that actually moved from one particular place to another place, the change
Mhm.
of roles, one person actually resigned, for example. All of those could be some of the trigger points for you to act, whether it is to
Yeah.
create a product, a project. Sometimes it could be external objectives, external aspects that happen, like what is happening now. To be honest, nobody has a control in terms of how we are reacting, what is happening around, right? We're just trying to react on the basis of what we know. It could be totally wrong, it could be limited, it could be massive. It really depends on the so it is external, something that is happening outside our control. Same with, for example, competition. Some of the competition, Apple introduced a new iPad, then everybody starts introducing some of the tablets. For example, Android has got their own tablet, and then once Android started with the tablets, then Apple had to move, because the Android is taking over the market and the phones are actually coming up. The Android phones are actually gaining more and more user base. So Apple had to create something else to sustain the market, to actually lead the market share. They had to create the distinction, the differentiation. They created a completely different product called the Apple Watch. Um, again again the competition followed, and they created the Android, the Samsung Gear, and things like that. So now Apple had to create, keep
What?
going. Again, coming back to the tasks. So these are the inputs that you have that would go into the planning as a set of activities that you do. And
Yeah.
within this knowledge area, what do? You actually plan for your business analysis, what kind of approach you would like to use, whether you'd like to use the waterfall model, or whether you use agile, scrum, Kanban. All of those things would be part of that. And within that, what kind of thing would you like to use? Do you want to actually create the requirements documents using FRS, BRD, SRS type, or do you want to actually use user stories? How you plan to use a backlog? What is the kind of communication? All of those, the planning would be there. Then how are you actually planning the stakeholder engagement? How would you plan to identify the stakeholders? Who are the key stakeholders, internal and external? And once identified, how would you engage them? And what is the methodology? How are you going to extract the requirements? Do you want to conduct interviews? Do you want to conduct workshops? Do you want to actually have a one-on-one sessions with each of the senior management? Who is key? Who should you actually engage? What are the kind of things that you would like to ask them? What kind of interfaces would you like to expose to them? What kind of methodologies would you like to adopt to show to them? The prototyping, POCs, demos, showcases. So all of these you're actually trying to plan even before you start doing that. And then again, the activities involved in the task that you're doing here is again all planning. It's not actual doing of this work. You're still trying to figure out in your head as to what is the best approach for you, what kind of activities you might need to really do when you start the execution of the project or the process. How would you like to plan for the business analysis governance? So in terms of governance, as in what is the structure, what procedures, what policies, what kind of review policies would you have? What kind of reviewers would you have? Do you have peer reviews? Do you have a third party review? Do you have to, how are you going to validate? Who is going to take the final decision whether the requirements are right or not? Who are the requirements owners? So all of these, again, the governance structure. And then you would plan the business analysis, information management, again, to do with how you're going to disseminate information, the communication strategy, the policy. How often do you want to communicate? Who is going to be informed about your progress on the requirements? How are you going to let them know that? Is it a meeting? Is it going to be a workshop? Are you going to send them an email out every week or every day? Is it going to be a report? Is it going to be a PowerPoint format? All of these things need to be thought out, and that's what you're trying to do within the business analysis planning. And then you need to identify the various improvements that you need to do for the performance of your business analysis activities. It could be to do with individuals. How are you going to identify the right persons that are going to do the work? How are they going to do the work? Do they have the right skills? Are you going to train them? How are you going to actually help improve the performance? How are they going to access the resources, the right set of resources for understanding, for learning, for incorporating their learning, for kind of applying their skills? Do you have any templates that you can potentially use on the ground, just so that they can start doing things instead of just having some theoretical concepts? So all of these, everything to do with the approach, the activities, the tools, the techniques, the templates, everything, you need to start thinking about it from now. So again, it's not the actual doing. This is just about planning. You're trying to identify whether we've got all of those at our disposal, and if we have, how are we going to start using them in the process, in the project or process. And the outputs for these are the kind of activities that we do in this knowledge area. And what are the outputs for the from this particular knowledge area, which will again be inputs for the next one, which we're going to discuss later. So these are the outputs. So essentially what comes out, what are the outcomes or outputs, essentially is basically you will have, by the end of this knowledge area or the set of activities, you should have an approach for your business analysis. As in, that's what we call as business analysis approach, a deliverable. But essentially that means that you need to have a documented or agreed upon way of doing something. How you plan to approach, what kind of tools would you like to use, how are you going to do the workshops, are you going to collect the requirements, what are the kind of activities that you do after you collect the requirements, what is the way that you would communicate. So all of them you would mention. And then a stakeholder engagement approach. How are you going to engage the stakeholders? And so what are the ways that you would need to identify who are the people? So basically that's where the the concept of RASCI matrix, the responsible, accountable, and then all those kind of things that you people to be informed, all of that you would need to mention specifically in the stakeholder engagement plan. So how are you going to approach for that? What kind of workshops that you would like to conduct? What kind of interviews would you like to conduct? How are you going to plan to work around those? Are you going to do it yourselves within the team, or do you have to have recruit a third party partner to come over and conduct those interviews? So all of these things, again, you need to clearly mention. And the governance approach. So what kind of governance you would have within this? So once the business analysis activities are done, they actually create these kind of deliverables, or the artifacts are created. There could be requirements documents, the plans, the reports, and everything, the communication plan. So who is going to review them? Who is going to validate and verify these, that yes, these are good, these are of good quality, this is the right level of detail that is captured? Who is going to do that? And then once it is done, who's going to take a decision about the process being followed? This is correct process. This is a set of correct parameters that need to be assessed, measured, and put in place. So all of these again are actually mentioned in the governance approach. And then again, as for the business analysis information, so once you're done with the activity, you would capture that in the information management approach. So again, talking about communication plans, the channels, the frequency of communication, the format of communication. Is it a report that needs to be sent out? Is it more of a meeting? Is it a kind of a sprint planning kind of an activity that you would like to have? Sprint planning, sprint review, sprint retrospective. So everything needs to be actually put down and get kind of agreed upon. It's not about the documentation again. What is important is whether you've covered these. It doesn't have to be one specific deliverable for each of them, but at least even if it's just one report, you need to identify all of these. And that is what is the important thing for the business analysis planning. And obviously the next one is the performance assessment report. And how would you like to assess whether the processes are good, whether the people are good, whether they need training, whether they need retraining, whether they have got the right skills. If not, how are you going to getting the talent from outside, the recruitment process, all of that, the interviewing process for the new recruits, their onboarding, their training, once they get into the situation, who are going to give them the role definition, the roles and responsibilities, all of that. So all of these are actually covered in the business analysis performance assessment. So that's the kind of approaches that we should have as outputs from this knowledge area. So now we will discuss each of them. So when we talk about the tasks that we do here, so we have a plan business analysis approach, plan stakeholder engagement, plan business analysis. So everything is a plan here. If you see, the first one is you need to plan for the business analysis approach. Once we define the approach, then we see how we're going to get the requirements. So we say that, right, for example, requirements, but who gives the requirements in the first place? Where do you get the requirements from? Some people, right? So that's where the people element come in, the stakeholders. So stakeholders could be internal as well as external. Some people give the requirements, some people do the work, the SMEs, the subject matter experts. Some people, even though they give, they do not have the authority. So we need to identify who are these people. That's where the stakeholder engagement comes in, right? And then you plan the governance aspect of it. Again, the reason why I'm telling all these things is it should come in, they should go into your mind as to how the whole business analysis area of work really happens. So you need to have the clear idea in terms of what is involved in the process. So there is a approach of business analysis, there is a stakeholder engagement, there's a governance bit about the structuring and the reviewing and the workflows, and how if there is a problem, the complaint management, the problem escalation of the problem. So that is all part of the governance. And then the information management is all about communications. Where does the information reside? How are you going to communicate, pass this information across the channels? All of those are part of the information management. And finally, once you have the process, that doesn't mean it is going to be a gold standard, right? It needs to go through some churns. It needs to be improved. It needs to be reviewed. The whole process as such needs to be looked at periodically, and also based on an event. If somebody somebody says that I need to change this procedure, you should be able to change it. So that's driven by an event. Or if you can have a monthly or a quarterly or a half yearly review of this particular process. Look at everything. How are we doing the things, right? How are we doing the things? How is the procedures? What are the kind of rules that go in? How are the processes being laid? Are the processes being followed or not? Is there the rigor that we have in the process implementation as much as we have in the process definition? So all of those things need to be looked at, and that's why we have this planning and monitoring, the very first one. It's a bit senior. It requires a bit of senior involvement and get the commitment and the support and the resources from the senior management, typically the CXOs, because it involves some kind of budget, some decisions about people being taken in, training. There is a lot of development aspects. So either technologies, buying new tools, for example, which might need, for example, if you want to do some Jira kind of a thing, requirement management, then buying licenses with Jira or any such tool takes a huge time, cost, and money. The costs money to get those into the company. So you need to plan for all of these, and that's why how can you really try and get these things off the ground in the first place is basically through the involvement of the senior management. So that's what pretty much we do within the business analysis planning approach.